As libertarians, we believe that other people's business is not ours to control. As far as social issues, do you feel like there are any things you diverge from that on?
No, I do not. I believe that people should be free to live however they choose so long as they are not harming anyone else.
One of the biggest issues right now, as far as us as libertarians go, is drug policy. Do you believe that softer drugs such as marijuana should be legalized or decriminalized? And second, would you believe that hard drugs such as cocaine or heroin should be decriminalized or legalized as well?
Yeah, I definitely would support the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana, particularly restoring voting rights from those who have lost their voting rights because of the policies that we've had against these victimless crimes. Prohibition does not work. I would rather we spend more resources on helping people with addiction issues rather than putting them in prison.
In Iowa specifically, I believe that the state of Iowa already had passed legislation as far as transgender people being able to use the bathroom of their choice. Even if it hasn't, would you support or denounce a policy such as that?
I think it should be up to each individual business. It kind of surprises me that of all the issues that we have in America and in Iowa, that's the biggest issue that people want to talk about. I think it's up to the private business what they're going to allow, and I don't see that as being a government policy which bathroom we're going to use.
Awesome. Iowa does currently have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, I think at only 3.1%. So
That's correct.
how would you continue this kind of downward trend as far as unemployment goes?
Well, I think what we got to do is we've got to take a look at what the state is doing. Right now, they're giving lots of corporate welfare to these big corporations, and that's actually hurting us. It's hurting the economy, it's hurting the small businesses, and it is driving people out of state. So, yes, we do have low unemployment, but we're also exporting a lot of people out of Iowa. And we've been doing that now in the past 20 years. I think we've lost 60,000 people that have moved out of the state. So I want to actually bring them back in by sound tax policy. And I have a plan to phase out the Iowa sales tax, which would help our border towns. Some of our border towns, like Council Bluffs, where I live, people are going over to Nebraska. I think we can get them back if we would have some sound policy and make some changes.
Awesome. So a study in 2015 by Education Week found that Iowa finished 24th among the 50 states with an overall score of 75 out of 100 and an average grade of C. How would you improve or change the education system of your state?
One thing that we've got to look at is things have changed. We have a lot of technology that we did not have years ago. So the technology we're using, Skype right now, the state of Iowa back in 1989 created what they call the ICN, the Iowa Communications Network, which would allow people to, this was long before Skype, but you could view classrooms from other towns. So if somebody in another town had this a class that your school didn't offer, particularly in rural schools, you could tap in. Well, that's outdated now because with things like Skype, that's really unnecessary, and we can start to teach people and not do a one-size-fits-all, but we can have kids learn at their own pace. So we've got to look at the whole system of how we're teaching. It doesn't quite work in this modern technology that we've got. There are much better ways of doing things, and that's where we should more focus on rather than continuing to just throw more money at a problem. And that has actually made our education worse. Our scores continue to decline, but we throw more and more money at it.
Right. Say you were in favor of like reforming the current public school system or moving towards a system of school choice or some combination.
Well, it has to be kind of a combination in Iowa because we've got a lot of rural communities. So the idea that you would send your kids to private school, some of these towns have just a few hundred people in them.
Right.
So you're probably not going to have a whole lot of competition. We can open it up to homeschooling, things like that. We can also allow children to open enroll in whatever district they choose. They may decide they want to take their child out of this district and put them in another district. That's one option. And also allow people that want to send in the cities where they have competition to allow them to send their child to the school of their choice.
And so one issue that seems to kind of split libertarians down the middle is abortion. So would you identify as pro life or pro-choice or pro-choice with some exceptions or what?
Yeah, I don't. It's a very complex issue. I don't think that One, I don't think the government should be funding it. I don't think they should be funding any abortions. The second point, though, is I don't think that legislation against abortions is going to prevent abortions. The nations that have tried this, such as Uganda, such as Chile, have not. It's not worked out very well, and we've not actually decreased abortions. So that is something that we could sit around and hope that we have legislation that does something. I think it would have very bad consequences if we're not careful. If you put exceptions on there, which I think you almost certainly would, and even if you got it passed in a state like Iowa, where you've got about 55% of the population, I would say would be for. But even if you were to change that and got it passed, you would have exceptions. If you are not careful, you could have like an exception for rape, and then men be falsely accused of rape. You could have women being accused of forcing a miscarriage, which is very easy to do. So I don't think that the idea of adding more laws is going to solve that. But the party is very, as you say, very divided on the issue. We have a lot of pro-life people, pro-choice people in the Libertarian Party of Iowa. It's about split 50-50. And I certainly welcome all their support. And I would, as governor, go around and talk to the youth of today and actually educate them on, your actions do have consequences. And we can lower the number of abortions by talking to people and working together.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think I've seen a bunch of studies that like sex education in high schools can decrease the amount of unwanted pregnancies by like huge amounts. So that could be extremely beneficial as well. Iowa is, as I understand it, an extremely agriculturally heavy state, and farming is a major sector of its economy. And because of this, Iowa receives over $1 billion annually in farm subsidies from the federal government. So do you support these subsidies, and would your state continue accepting them under your governorship?
I think that one thing that the federal government does is they pass a lot of mandates, ethanol mandates that require certain amounts of ethanol to be used. That can be very dangerous. I would rather open it up to a level playing field into subsidies for everything. If the federal government would do that, I would be happy. Into subsidies for big oil, into subsidies for every type of energy, and let the market figure out and determine what is best. As far as accepting it, I guess I'd have really no control over that as long as the federal government's giving that out. But I think that we could look at doing other things as well. And we could also look into industrial hemp and things like that as well that would benefit our economy and move us away. Because one of the big dangers is that you get so heavily invested into something and then the subsidies or the mandates cut out eventually. And then you've got this drastic shift that has to happen overnight. And you could end up with a farm crisis like we had back in the 80s.
Like in Washington, one of the most reported on and covered problems in our Congress and Senate right now is healthcare, and the big fight between Democrats and Republicans on whether Obamacare should stand or be repealed and replaced or just repealed. What is your stance on healthcare?
I think it should be repealed. One of the problems we've had in Iowa too is there's now in a few counties you can still get private insurance if you're self-employed. That would be covered by the Obamacare. That's not really acceptable. A lot of people after this year will no longer have any options of insurance, and even if you do, it's going to go up about 43% next year. This is not acceptable to Iowans. Iowans cannot get insurance now. The system has failed on multiple levels. And so that's something that as governor you can't do a whole lot about, but I would certainly favor the repeal of it.
And so you mentioned a tax policy earlier about sales tax. So Iowa right now has a state income tax of an average of like 6 to 8% for most workers. In your opinion, is this tax fair, or should it be raised or lowered? And as far as other tax policies go, what would your stance be on increasing, lowering, or removing them?
I think we need to get back to making sure the government's doing what its actual necessary functions are. And what they do is they continue to spend more and more money. Right now, the state has a budget crisis because they've continued to spend, they've increased spending, and now it's caught up with them, but they've actually lowered taxes for big corporations. Everyone else's taxes remained about the same. They've raised the gas tax, a few other things, but most of the taxes remained about the same, but they've increased spending. And they've increased it on a bunch of waste and load. But we could go through, start decreasing that, and then decreasing the taxes. I don't think the tax system is fair at all. And particularly, we have a property tax, an income tax, and a state sales tax. A lot of this, there's talk now that the Republicans want to increase the sales tax in Iowa. That would be a tax on really the poorest Iowans and would not work. It would actually drive more jobs out of the state and hurt our border cities quite a bit.
Iowa's state budget has grown about 4 to 6% annually, including inflation in like recent history. How would you avoid continuing this trend, and where would you choose to make budget cuts?
The budget, I mean, if you don't go into the sub-details, it's over 1,000 pages long. I've been through it. There are several things that you can make cuts to, and no one would ever notice at all. There's several little pet projects in there that you can go through this whole list. I would order an analysis of all of it, have each person or each department or agency explain to me what it is exactly they're doing. You occasionally find stuff that is buried in, whether it be education, whether it be healthcare, you find stuff that's buried in there that can be eliminated, and it's just complete waste. So that's how I would do it. I would do an analysis of each agency and each department and then start making cuts on day one.
So would you be forced to make any major cuts, do you believe, or would you be able to make all of your cuts through these kind of smaller projects?
Yeah, I don't think there would be any necessarily major cuts, especially at the beginning, because you would want to find out exactly what the impact's going to be. Right now, the state is making major cuts because they cannot afford to pay their bills on time. So, but they're cutting to things like domestic violence shelters, mental health facilities, and some of these things end up costing the state more money, like the mental health facilities. They cut them. Well, now they just have to transport people longer distances, or they end up in the criminal justice system, which costs even more than what it would have been to keep them in the mental health facilities.
Right. As far as environmental protections go, this is another issue that libertarians are kind of split on, whether there should be environmental protections at all, and if so, how they would be balanced with a free market. So in your opinion, what environmental protections are necessary, and how would you balance that with a free market?
You know, you can't knowingly pollute. You can't knowingly do something that's going to harm someone else, particularly when it commits fraud where you're lying about doing it. Companies should not be allowed to do that. There should be, in Iowa, we do need the funds from the state budget, I think, to actually protect our public waterways, things like that. As far as the market working, though, we have to pretty well let the market work. We can't favor big business over small business with regulations just designed to hurt the small business. That's what we often see. And they don't actually make us any safer. They don't make our environment better. They just keep competition out of the marketplace. And that's one thing we have to make sure we balance that.
Overall, what would you say your goal in running this campaign is?
Well, we've got to keep major party status in Iowa. So that would be 2% of the vote next year. So that's obviously goal number one. I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. Also, helping down ticket candidates. So by being on, doing interviews, by going out in the public, being on the ballot, these are things that we can advertise to and help our down ticket candidates and run more candidates for office. We want to run more candidates than we've ever ran in on our state party history. We want to take the message to the people of Iowa. We want to start winning some of these elections. So that's my major goal. I can bring a lot of attention, I think, to the race and to the state party, and a lot of attention to our issues. And occasionally they do change public policy based on what we've campaigned on.
Right. And so Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson in the national election in 2016 received about 3.8% of the vote in Iowa, which was above the national average. So how would you go off of what Gary Johnson did correct or wrong and make those changes to do a better job?
Yeah, I think one thing that Gary Johnson did was he brought a lot of media attention to the state of Iowa and to the party, and that's one thing we want to go off of. He also has a list of people that he brought into the party, a list of supporters or people that I know that he's brought into the party that I'm targeting right now and asking them for help in this campaign, and also asking some of these people to run for office themselves. So there's a lot of work that we're doing with that. As far as changing things around, one of the things we've got to do is continue to build our organization. In the past, we've not had a large organization. We've grown very rapidly in the past 4 years or so here in Iowa. We need to keep building upon that organization and building a movement.
The incumbent governor of Iowa currently is Kim Reynolds, who's a Republican. So what policies would you directly challenge her on in order to differentiate your campaigns?
The budget's going to be the big issue. They have mismanaged the budget. She was lieutenant governor under the previous Governor Branstad. they have mismanaged it to the point that they are having to borrow from the emergency reserves, and that puts the state at a huge risk in case there was ever, let's say, a natural disaster, or there's a flood, tornado, or a real bad farm crisis. It puts the state at a risk that we wouldn't be able to pay our bills. Last year we were not, or actually this April, we were not even able to pay income tax refunds on time because, as the state treasurer points out, we didn't have the money to pay it.
As I currently understand it, I don't believe you're actually on the ballot for governor yet. What steps are you taking to accomplish this goal, and do you believe you'll be able to accomplish it in time?
Yeah, so in order to get on the ballot, things have actually changed with our major party status that we have in Iowa now. I have to collect, it's only 296 valid signatures by the end of February, beginning of March. So we're almost there. I'd have to check in to see exactly where we're at. We'll probably get that in the next couple of weeks. There'll probably be competition for the Libertarian primary. I know there's going to be at least one other candidate running. So we'll have a primary, and the primary will be in June. And then after that, we're good to be on the general election ballot.
One of the biggest problems that libertarians often have is getting their name out, because the two major parties take up all of the news and get all of the media coverage. So how would you get your campaign out there and get your message out to the people of Iowa?
It's very difficult. There's a few ways that we're doing that, and we've been able to do it. So in the past, whenever we announced, we would have a little bit of coverage, but not a whole lot. This time, whenever I announced, when I relaunched the campaign here a couple weeks ago, we did so on TV. We did so in three of Iowa's largest newspapers on the eastern side of the state, and then also on the biggest talk radio station and program that we could. So that was how we've done that. We are doing another TV interview this weekend over in Cedar Rapids. So we're using traditional media as much as we can, but also online. There are effective ways to reach people through Facebook advertising, Google advertising that, quite frankly, the Democrats and Republicans don't always use very effectively, that we can reach a lot more people, and a lot more people that are in our demographic that are more likely to vote for us. That we're able to reach a lot more effectively than just relying on the traditional media, which may or may not cover us as we get closer to the general election.
Right.
We'll also go door to door. We've got local organizations that can do that, participate in parades, the fair booths and things like that as well.
From what I've read on your website, you have a pretty long history within the Libertarian Party. Can you just describe that for me?
Yeah, so in 2004, I was 16 years old, and I happened to have on Fox News was running in the background somewhere. I was getting ready to go to work, I think it was, and they had Gary Nolan, who was running for the Libertarian presidential nomination. He lost it, but he was on Fox News talking about the issues, and I thought, this is exactly what I believe. And so at that point, I started reading John Stossel and Judge Andrew Napolitano. I looked really into libertarian philosophy and became a libertarian. I moved from Missouri to Iowa 2006, where I went to college. At that point, I got involved in the Libertarian Party of Iowa. Did some national things between 2006 and 2008. Served on the national committee as an alternate for a while. Fortunately, got out of that. Now just focused locally. 2010, ran for Secretary of State the first time, and then ran again in 2014. So I've been around this for quite a while, and I can remember when people didn't know what a libertarian was, you would tell them that, and they would think librarians, vegetarians, they'd think all kinds of crazy things. And fortunately, a lot of that changed after Ron Paul's campaign, and then a lot of the work we've done after that.
Finally, one of the biggest problems that a lot of campaigns have, especially third-party campaigns, is funding. So how would you raise the campaign funding that you need in order to get your message out and run a successful campaign?
Yeah, part of it's going to be self-funding, and I'm going to fund myself, and I've been doing that. Another part is we have been reaching out to donors of my previous campaigns, donors of people, longtime activists that I've known in the party, and then reaching out to new donors as well. If people see success, they're more likely to donate money. That's how Ron Paul was able to collect his money. That's how Gary Johnson was able to raise a lot of his money as well. And so as long as people continue to see that we're doing stuff and that their money's being used wisely, I think they're going to contribute. We've still got lists of people that we're going to do direct mailings to and ask for money, as well as me making personal phone calls, which I've started doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it.